The final section of this unit is jurisdiction. Jurisdiction is the power of a court to hear a particular case. And when we're talking about the US legal system, we have to pay attention to two concepts. One is called subject matter jurisdiction, and one is called personal jurisdiction. And so we'll focus first on subject matter jurisdiction. And the idea here is, remember back when we were talking about the power of the federal government, we said that it has to be enumerated in the Constitution. And so the same thing is true of courts. A federal court cannot just hear any case it wants. It has to be, under Article 3, a power given to the federal court. And it is not waivable, meaning even if both parties want to be in the federal court, they can't be in the federal court if it's not within the federal court's power under the Constitution. So basically the subject matter jurisdiction question is a question of which court system am I going to bring this case in? Am I going to bring it in the federal court system, in which case I have to satisfy Article 3, or am I going to bring it in the state court system? Then we'll talk about personal jurisdiction, which is which state's system, in just a minute. But first, let's continue talking about the subject matter jurisdiction issues. So you've got a lot of states, you've got federal courts within each of those states, and as I just said, federal courts are courts of limited subject matter jurisdiction. They can only hear cases that are in Article 3, Section 2's grant of power to the federal courts. In contrast, state courts are courts of general subject matter jurisdiction. Almost any case could be brought in a state court, even a case about federal law, even a case about the US Constitution and whether something is constitutional. You can bring any of those in the state court. There are a very few number of federal statutes that grant exclusive jurisdiction to the federal courts, but generally speaking, you can bring anything in a state court. Federal courts are different. You've always got to show why there's jurisdiction. And there are two basic types of federal court jurisdiction. One is called diversity, and one is called federal question. Diversity jurisdiction is if the suit is brought by parties who are from two different states. So if I'm from New York and I want to sue someone from Georgia, and they're from Georgia, even if the case has to do with a state law issue, I can bring that in federal court because we are from two different states. And so we are diverse. And so under diversity jurisdiction, that can get into a federal court. And the idea here was that federal courts would protect a little bit against inherent local bias of the state court system. Now, the federal courts are still located in those states, so they're not completely free of bias, but federal judges, for example, get lifetime tenure, and so they're a little less beholden to local politics or local power dynamics and so forth. So if you've got citizens from two different states, you end up with the ability to get into federal court. Now, you might ask, well, how do you know what state you're from? Well, for individuals, the rule is to look at a thing called domicile. Domicile is a specific idea, and you can only have one. It's your residence plus where you intend to remain. And so if you are if you maybe have houses in lots of different locations, there's only one which is your domicile. So for individuals, it's one state, and it's your residence plus intent to remain, so it's where your center of gravity is. Probably it's where you vote, it's where your kids go to school, and so forth. For citizens, however, for corporations, however, we might look at a number of different rubrics for figuring out where a corporation is from. And the Supreme Court has had to address this question, and basically it's come down to the fact that the citizenship of a corporation is both the place of incorporation and the place of the principal place of business of the corporation, which is defined as the corporate headquarters. So for example, if you have a corporation which is incorporated in the state of Delaware, but it's got its corporate headquarters in Michigan, it is a citizen of both Michigan and Delaware for purposes of diversity jurisdiction. If it has its place of incorporation is Michigan and its corporate headquarters are in Michigan, then Michigan is the only state where it's a citizen. So basically a corporation could have one or it could have two places of citizenship. Now, the second area of jurisdiction in federal courts is federal question jurisdiction. And federal question jurisdiction is what it sounds like. Does the case raise a federal question? In other words, is it a case brought pursuant to a federal statute, or is it a case brought pursuant to the US Constitution? Then you can get into federal court. You can keep it in state court if you want, but you can bring it into federal court. So those are the two bases, diversity jurisdiction and federal question jurisdiction. Now, once you've decided whether you're in federal court or state court, you still have to decide in which state. So if it's a state court, you have to decide which state court system. Will it be Georgia's? Will it be New York's? Will it be Alaska's? Will it be California's? But even if you're in federal court, you have to figure out which federal court, because after all, there are federal courts operating in every state in the country. So how do you know which federal court to file your suit in? And personal jurisdiction is considered a constitutional due process right of the defendant. So the plaintiff chooses whatever state they want to sue in. And then the defendant, it's up to them to either waive any objection, to say, okay, fine, you're suing me in Georgia. I'm happy being sued in Georgia. Let's go forward. That's fine. You can waive the right. Or you can contest it, and you can say, well, you're suing me in Georgia. I don't have any contact with the state of Georgia. I'm not a citizen of the state of Georgia by either of the definitions of citizenship we looked at, place of incorporation and corporate headquarters. So I'm not a citizen of Georgia, and I don't have enough contact with Georgia that it would be fair, pursuant to constitutional due process, to sue me in the state of Georgia. So we look at how you can get jurisdiction over someone in that particular state, let's say Georgia. One way, if it's an individual, is you can assert what's called the traditional basis of jurisdiction. Namely, you can grab them, you can sue them, you can serve them with process while they are in the state. So if they are in the state, even if they're in the state visiting, maybe they're not a citizen of that state, but they're there, you can serve them with process and you can sue them in the state. So that's a kind of traditional basis. You can also sue them in the state if they are a citizen of that state, and we just looked at citizenship. If you're an individual and you're domiciled there, you can be sued there. If you're a corporation and you have your corporate headquarters or your place of incorporation there, then you can be sued there. So those are the traditional bases. But then you might also have additional bases where we might look to whether, for example, you've consented to jurisdiction in a particular location. So we've got physical presence, we've got domicile, but we might also have consent. So did you sign a contract, for example, where in the contract itself you said, if there's a dispute over this contract, the suit can go forward in X state, right? So you could have that. You could also have consent where, I don't know if you've ever been to an athletic event, you might have bought a ticket. And if you bought a ticket, you might see that there's fine print on the back of the ticket that says, by buying this ticket, you agree that if you want to sue the baseball team or the stadium, you need to do it in a particular state. So that's what's known as a forum selection clause of a contract. So you have consented to jurisdiction in that state. And as I mentioned, this is a waivable right. And so you can decide as the defendant that you don't mind litigating a case in Georgia, let's say, and then you can go forward if you want to. And these basic traditional principles were established in an old 1800s case called Pennoyer versus Neff, where the court said, if you want jurisdiction over someone, you've got to grab them in the state, or you've got to grab property of theirs in the state, and so forth. But now we have an idea of specific jurisdiction, an idea that you could get jurisdiction over someone about activities that that party does somewhere where they're not a citizen, where they're not living. So think about a corporation, right? You've got a corporation, they have their corporate headquarters in one place, they have their place of incorporation in another place, but maybe they're producing products that they're selling in all 50 states. Well, if they sell a product in some state that they are not a citizen of, but they create harm in that state to, let's say, someone who's in that state, it shouldn't surprise you that maybe they should be subject to jurisdiction in that state. So, for example, if you bought a bottle of soda and the soda company was maybe based in a couple of states, but you're not in that state, and you open the bottle and it explodes in your face and causes you blindness or something like that, it's not so surprising that maybe that soda company should be potentially suable in your home state. And that's the idea behind specific jurisdiction. They might not be able to be sued about everything, but they can at least be sued about the things that they did that harmed people in that state. And there's this constitutional due process test, which is referred to as the minimum contacts test, under a case called International Shoe versus Washington. And basically the idea is, did the company or did the defendant, if it's an individual or a company, have sufficient minimum contacts with the state such that asserting jurisdiction over that defendant in the state does not offend traditional notions of fair play and substantial justice. It's sort of a fairness inquiry, and the idea is we look at whether you committed a harm, and that's what the lawsuit's about, and you did it in this state even though you're not a citizen of the state. And so that's the idea behind jurisdiction. And as I said, we've got subject matter jurisdiction so that we can figure out whether we're in federal or state court. We've got personal jurisdiction to figure out which state. And finally, within a state, or within the federal system, we have extra rules that are not constitutional. They're just rules of allocating business within the court system, and they are venue rules. So for example, let's say there's personal jurisdiction in New York. New York's a big state. Where in New York? Up in Albany, in Buffalo, down in New York City, in Brooklyn. Where do we go in order to bring that suit? And every state, as well as the federal system, has venue rules to try to allocate business within the court system. So that covers us with jurisdiction. Again, you have to look at subject matter jurisdiction between federal and state courts. You've got to look at personal jurisdiction. In which state does the defendant have sufficient contact? And then the venue rules, which are additional statutory rules that allocate business among the courts within that jurisdiction.